Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Mike. I am the host here for the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, each week we get together and we have some absolutely awesome conversations with some awesome people, different leaders from all different verticals of business. Because the opportunity for this show, if you're investing your time with us, one, we want to really provide some good value, have some collaborative conversations, talk about wins, right? What wins have our leaders experienced? What losses have they taken, and what did they learn from those, from the positions they're in? And so I'm really excited today. I have with me my new friend, I would say a good friend, my new friend, Alex Rodgers. Alex, welcome to the show. Alex is he's the technology director of global business planning for Nike. That's pretty awesome and pretty solid. And you have a really illustrious, solid business background. So I'm excited to talk about that and get into some leadership conversations with you today. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for inviting me to be on the program.
Absolutely, man. When we connected and just reading through the stuff like this, like your background and all of the things that I'm sure you have to share today are just really exciting for someone like myself and the show to be able to share with our audience. And so, as we're just getting started, if you would take a couple or 3 minutes and maybe just tell people who you are, where you're at right now, what your background is, kind of how you came up. I know you have some military background. I'd love to hear some more, man.
Sure, great, thanks. Well, currently I'm a finance director at Nike, working in Portland, Oregon, at the Nike Global World Headquarters, and I'm my current role. I'm responsible for the in-year forecasting, planning, reporting, and analysis for the Nike technology portfolio. So I've been with the company just about 2 years. Prior to Nike, I worked in merchandising finance at Chewy, an online pets retailer based out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Prior to that, I served at Walmart in both technology finance as well as merchandising finance and strategy in the Walmart US division. Prior to Walmart, I worked at Office Depot for about 9 years. I worked in stores finance and then uh, group corporate financial planning and analysis. And I spent my last role in merchandising finance, where I was the finance owner of inventory for the North American business at Office Depot. And then prior to that, I worked at GE Healthcare as a balance sheet analyst and as a commercial finance financial analyst, supporting the used diagnostic imaging and equipment business. And my first role out of business school was at LG Energy, a utility company in Louisville, Kentucky. So Mike mentioned that in the opening that I served in the military. So I graduated from West Point, and I served as a field artillery officer at Fort Liberty, used to be called Fort Bragg, as
Okay.
a field artillery officer for 4.5 years. And I had a variety of leadership positions during my tenure in the Army. So um, I see myself as like a continuous learner and a relationship builder. I've been fortunate in my career to have have had the opportunity to serve at some of the world's largest companies during and across a variety of business situations, business models, and functional areas. So, kind of see myself as that the finance athlete, keeping in the Nike, I think, mindset.
Love it, man. Love it. The finance athlete. Here, I will tell you who you would get along great with. I'm sure. I have a buddy, Ben Koch, who he's the dean of mathematics school of division in the UK. You guys could probably get into some conversations when it comes to all the numbers and everything. One other thing that stood out to me, it said, when we were talking, you served on selection boards for several different congressmen as
Yes.
well.
Yes. So, often as a congressman and women, they decide on, which candidates to offer an appointment to one of the service academies. They ask graduates of the service academies to serve on the board. So, what I would, that involves, the candidates come in for, it's usually a super kind of like a super Saturday. The
Hmm.
candidates come in and they're asked a series of questions around, about their academics, about their their athletic activities, leadership, and then there's questions around ethics and integrity, and then there's
Hmm.
also some questions about um, you know modern current events, where leaders have to make decisions under uncertainty or that may be controversial, and it's a way of like assessing candidates strength and their ability to navigate through a challenging 4-year experience at the academy. So I've served on selection boards in Florida as well as Arkansas. So had the opportunity to be on the other side of the table.
No, I think that's really cool. And I have to imagine like some of those conversations when you get into, talking about leadership and really sort of peeling back the onion, so to speak, to be able to see what some of those folks are. Actually, my buddy Ben popped in here. He says director of division, dean for computing, engineering, and mathematical sciences. Would love to get into it with Alex. So he's overseas there. So let me ask you, when it comes to leadership specifically, when you would get into it, and let's kind of start there. When you would get into asking questions, did they have predetermined questions, or did they let you free flow and say, hey, let's talk about this?
Well, I think there really were not necessarily um, prepared questions. What we would typically do is there'd be several of us on the panel, and one
Hmm.
of us would address one of those categories that I described. Honor, integrity, academics, performance. Their athletics.
Hmm.
Leadership. So that's where we kind of like that's how we kind of broke it up, and then of course the current events as well.
So, as somebody that you've had an opportunity, yeah, I mean, you went to West Point, strong leadership there, had an opportunity to interview with some of those folks, held really amazing positions that you have been in throughout your career. What are some key things? Let's get into just sort of one of the core basic leadership questions from your perspective. If somebody is having that conversation with you, what are 2 or 3 things that you are looking for somebody, traits or characteristics for somebody that you would say, "Yep, I give them the checkbox. They would make a good leader." What are a couple of characteristics that really stand out to you, Alex?
I think, first of all, uh, the service academies are, they're highly competitive, and they're essentially Ivy League caliber institutions. So the
Sure.
academic rigor is pretty intense. And so what we're trying to, ascertain is whether or not this person can survive the academics. Because I know the curriculum has changed over time, but it's typically traditionally a math, science, and engineering based education. So everybody know, even the poets know how to use a calculator. And so,
Okay.
and it's given all the time management that's required to navigate a service academy experience, we want to make sure that people are prepared for, they can handle the academic rigor. The other
Sure.
part of that is every cadet is considered to be an athlete. So we want to make sure, we're trying to ascertain whether or not they can, they can they can they can measure up to like the the athleticism that's going to be required during their tenure, be it the PE classes, the other military training that's involved, and so we want to make sure that they're capable in that regard. I think the
Sure.
other question is, we may ask questions around ethics. So we may pose a question, say, can you give an example of a ethical dilemma that you faced in your lifetime, up to your age of like 16 or 17, that you had to resolve, you had to kind of reconcile through, and you're just kind of looking for like the thought process and try to see
Sure.
how they think about it. And then you may ask a question about, leadership of maybe how they've motivated their peers to accomplish some type of like goal or objective. So, but athletics kind of plays into that because often we
Sure.
find that some of the candidates are captains of their respective athletic teams within high school, or they're on the student council. They've got some other leadership experience.
So how would you say, and I think that's great. So what I'm hearing you say, obviously the academic, that like the intelligence, right? The mental prowess,
Mm-hmm.
but then also the physical prowess is something that's as valuable for somebody that's coming into one of those roles to have. So
Hmm.
how would you say that transcends to business? So you move from that into these business roles and some of these like your finance positions where you're leading a team and you're in that sort of position. What are the things then that you took from those experiences to explore on the business end of things?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously, the service academies are their leadership institutions. Primarily
Mhm.
that are their goal is to produce leaders of character that serve in the common defense. But what I appreciated really about my experience at West Point and as an active duty soldier was this concept of servant leadership, where leaders are responsible for enabling their teams to reach their full potential. So that
Mhm.
involves creating an environment for their teams to be successful, setting clear guidance and priorities, removing obstacles, holding people accountable, investing in people so that they can grow, not just to accomplish like the organization's mission, but they can achieve their own personal goals as well. And I think the Army, in my mind, expected leaders to know a lot, everything that was kind of going on within their soldiers' lives, because ultimately that's going to affect their performance on the the job.
Sure.
And often, in the Army, in the military, you may not be operating under the most like ideal conditions, and you're operating under, in a lot of ways, under uncertainty. And so, it's a great, it was a great experience to be able to lead people who, in some cases, many cases, had more experience than you did, in the Army, but you were the one who had you were the leader who had to actually lead this team. So establishing credibility by being technically and tactically proficient in your job,
Mhm.
and and be willing to listen and learn from those people who've had the time in the service.
I think that's really good. You bring up a good point that a lot of times, and I think that transcends to business too, doesn't it? Like a lot of times we're put into positions, we're put into roles where it's like, hey, I'm
Hmm.
supposed to do this thing, but you've got a man or woman that may be quote unquote answering to you, but they've been with the company for 10 years and they're not in that role. So, let me ask you, how do you approach that? If you're moving into a role, you're moving into either a titled leadership role or you're coming in as a team lead or you're coming in from that position. What are the first few things you would do, Alex, to say, okay, well, let me establish that uh,
Hmm.
to show that I've got that proficiency and show that I have that prowess and show that I belong in this position? How would you start that?
Hmm. Well, one thing that I've always done as I've changed companies, and often when I change roles, is there's a book called The First 90 Days, and the name of the author is actually slipping me right now, but it's a tool that I've used to help manage those job and career and company transitions. I found it's a pretty easy read, and it's a good, gives you, what it's designed to do is enable you to start adding value and reach break even as quickly as possible. But I think it's always important when you join a team is to get to know the team and understand what their roles and responsibilities are, their tenure and experience with the company, where they think that there's what they think is going well, what they think where there's opportunity, make changes and improve improve the team's performance. I think the other thing is, understanding what their goals and objectives are, what they'd like to accomplish in their careers, but also, for them to you to understand like how they'd like to be managed and what their expectations are of you. And I think that's critically important, because ultimately we're all working together as a team to accomplish a certain goal, but you need to have alignment and have a established credibility and a relationship with people to in order to do that.
No, absolutely. And I looked it up. I think it's the right one. The first 90 days proven strategies for getting up to speed is that Michael Watkins.
Oh,
Does that
Michael
sound right?
Watkins. That's it. That's it.
There you
Yes,
go.
it's a good book, and it's a fairly, again, it's a fairly easy read, and you can use it, reuse it, as you progress throughout your career.
Some of those are the best books where you get it and you receive a message, you read it, you get that message, and then over time, even as you progress, it's one of those
Hmm.
books. What I'm hearing you say is that maybe you get a little bit different message as you get more experience,
Right.
and it's
And it's funny. You just, your question sparked a memory from when I was a cadet. I remember
Mhm.
it was in a PE class. One of the PE instructors, he made a comment about, when the first thing you need to do is assess your current state of like physical fitness. And that also goes along
Sure,
with like when you join a unit, a new army unit, you assess the current state before you make any wholesale changes. You know,
sure,
take 30 days to kind of observe and ask questions, and learn about how things, how we actually got to where we are right now, and then that may adds be the catalyst for where you can make changes. Another technique that I use too as a part of
mhm,
that exercise of onboarding is I get a list of questions, of like 10 questions, and I pose those questions to people across the organization to better learn
okay,
about how the company and the culture, ways of working, especially if you're joining a new company, to kind of understand how things work around there. So you avoid, I'll call it, those cultural third rails, and
absolutely.
you learn how to fit in before standing out.
I no, I think that's really good. So I'm going to recap here for a minute, and there's a couple of things because I just so I don't forget to put this on the screen and so forth. A couple of notes. First off, if you're just now tuning in, make sure whether you're on the audio podcast or the video, make sure please throw a like on the video and share this with someone that could need to hear this message and have an opportunity to learn from it. The other thing for anybody as we go through and have this conversation with Alex, if you want to connect with Alex, you can do that at linkedin.com/n/ Alex Rodgers. That's RODGERS1. So for anybody that might want to connect with you and have some continued conversation, network a little bit, and so forth. And I want to recap for a minute because I think it's really good what you just shared. And I always sit here and take notes,
Hmm.
so that because I gain as much having some of these conversations with guests, and I think it's just awesome. So I said, hey, what are the things when you're going into a leadership role? Framing the question, you said, you got to know the people, you got to know the team. You wrapped around at the end there, and one of the things that you said was, hey, I have these 10 questions I ask across the organization to assess where they're at. And I think that's something that is really, I'm going to hang on that for just a minute for our audience because I think it's something that's so valuable. So often leaders go in with this rigid approach and they say, well, I was put in this role, so let me tell you how we're going to do it. Right. And I don't know that that works as well anymore, especially in business, right? Like you need to go in and make sure that people feel they're a part of something that's collaborative. So you were saying, hey, learn about them, ask these questions, find out what's good, and then also what's not going well. And then you hung on something in there that you said, make sure to find out what people's goals are. Because I
Hmm.
think it's really effective. You're able to coach people well, you're able to connect people better, you manage through relationship if you know what their goals are, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and again, you're trying to, and to, I guess, leadership is all about, and I say in many ways influencing human behavior to accomplish the organization's mission, whatever that may
Absolutely.
be. So there's, that requires some degree of adaptability because there's people have different backgrounds, experiences, personalities, priorities per se. And so understanding the people that you're working with and the team dynamics is, critical to, I think, getting off on the right foot as a leader. Um,
Absolutely.
and in my career, I've had to, I've transitioned to different, like, I'll call it, industries and organizations and business models. So, you know, to be able to do that, one needs to kind of be I call it, a continuous learner, in a sense that you're constantly soaking in, um, soaking in new information. I often I've been a former colleague of mine from Office Depot tuned me into this podcast with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher.
Okay.
And it's and so one of the things that Scott was just talking about on one of his, it may have been his, I can't remember if it's his own personal podcast or the one with
Sure.
Kara, but he was talking about, the need for leaders to listen more. And that's something that Scott had learned early in his career as a CEO. He had like a CEO coach or someone follow him around for a day, and he said the key thing, you need to listen more. You may ask a
Hmm.
few questions, but you need to listen to the people around you, because you get more informed as a leader to make better
Absolutely.
and better decisions.
100%. I think it's something that listening. I was talking with somebody on this show. I think it might have been last week with Scott, or maybe a couple weeks ago, that they said one of the best things that we can do to serve people is empowered listening.
Hmm.
Like you have to make sure really to be so focused and empowering when you're listening. And then on the level leadership here, I know Tammy, she says, agree, active listening is not about listening to respond, but listening to hear and understand. And
Hmm.
I think that is such a powerful statement. So often people are listening to, well, I got the next thing to get out. It's right on the tip of my tongue. You can see that they're coming with it, versus just taking the time to listen and understand what that person's perspective is to give them
Hmm.
an adequate response.
Yeah, and I actually, at West Point, my major was American politics with a minor
Okay.
in systems or industrial engineering. So I guess I didn't come up like a mathematician or an engineer per se. But
Uh-huh.
one of the courses that I took, this the core course for political science, my yearling or sophomore year, and I remember in the course syllabus, my professor, um, it basically, he had a quote in there, a phrase in the syllabus that said, something to the extent of having the difference between an uninformed opinion versus an educated answer. And so, by asking questions and learning about the organization,
That's good.
you're able to formulate educated answers. And maybe it may not be the perfect ideal, but it's better than in perfect like outcome. But it's the way that you kind of think through things and come to that decision.
No, that's really good. An uninformed opinion versus educated answer. I'm gonna hang on that one for a minute. Uh, Ben also brings up here. He says it's always that's always the answer. How do we communicate better? Listen more. And I think that's one of the cornerstones, certainly of leadership, is just good communication, having good communication. You know, um, Gosh, one of the things that you said a minute ago. Oh, I know something I wanted to ask you, Alex, because one of the unique things, like you have a lot of finance background, right? You're in finance right now, as a uh, financial analyst. That was the title, right? Financial analyst, business,
Uh,
global business planning. So you have
yes, I'm a director of global business planning at
so
Nike. Hmm.
so here's something that I find unique about you just in talking to you. So you're in these analytical roles. Like they're very logical roles, right? But as we're sitting here talking, what some of the first things that you are talking about here, like, hey, how do you lead people? What do you do? How do you connect with them? You have a lot to say about connection and relationship and knowing people, asking 10 good questions. So how does that play out, do you think, for you? Like you're in an analytical role, but being able to being able to effectively lead people in that more of emotional state.
Hmm.
Is there some advice that you would give to people? Because people can be leaders in any sort of role that they're in,
Hmm.
right?
That's correct.
But I think one of the most important things you're saying is like, hey, it's about the people, right?
Hmm. At the end of the day, the soldiers the soldiers do the work. And so, I think, one thing I've also kind of found is, like, finance organizations and teams are pretty lean. So, you, as a finance leader, you may have to serve as, I'll call it like a shoe leather executive, where you serve as an analyst, a manager, a director, a CFO in one day, depending on what time of the day or what the issue is. So you got to be willing
Sure.
to roll up your sleeves and not just simply direct the work. You may actually have to lean in and turn wrenches, in that regard.
Sure.
Um, so I think that to me has been kind of an observation as I've kind of journeyed throughout my career.
So if you're doing those things, like you said, the shoe leather executive, if you're having to roll up your sleeves, that doesn't absolve you. You still have people coming to you that need stuff, right? You're still in that leadership role. You may be in working with things. What are a couple or three pieces of advice you might give here? At least one good piece of advice. Maybe it just be one thing. How do you deal with the stress of that as an individual? So if I'm in a leadership role and I'm like, okay, I've got this thing that my team has to get done, but man, I got to roll up my sleeves and get into this, and I'm feeling the stress and I'm feeling the frustration. Could you offer any advice on how to deal with those sorts of things?
I think that's a good question. I mean, often you may get thrown a lot of different things during a given day or a week. I think it's about trying to classify the asks or the deliverables around the level of urgency, as well as like whether or not it's important, unimportant. So urgent and important is obviously number one. Urgent and not important might be number two. You know I'll call it unimportant but urgent is next, and
Okay.
then not urgent, not
Uh,
important as the last. And of course, you need to understand too, like who's asking for it and what ultimately where that deliverable is going,
Sure.
and it takes a good gauge. I think the other thing too is what has worked well for me is over the course of my career is doing intentionally working in roles that would be very challenging, but would grow me as a finance and a business professional. And
Hmm.
sometimes those are roles that no one else in the finance organization wanted to take. But but I found that on several occasions those were inflection points in my career, in my growth and development. And
Sure.
so, doing 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 that, I'll call it build some like it builds your level of physical fitness. If you think about
Sure.
NFL training camps, the players show up, but they're not in game shape, right? They may be working out in the off season, but you need to your body has to become acclimated towards taking a hit to
Sure.
avoid the chance of injury, and to really be able to perform at high levels over a course of a 16 game regular season. So by moving around and taking risks in my career, I was able to build, I'll call it, a certain level of like athleticism. So I could, which I think one builds confidence, but also enables one to transition into another role.
That's how you became the finance athlete. That's what, dude, you need to coin that, like hashtag finance athlete, right? Oh, I dropped this. Oh, grab that paper. So another question for you then. So, when you're in a role and you're talking about, okay, I'm coaching these people, I'm bringing these folks on board and so forth. What are some of the key, um, actually I have two questions. One I'm going to jot down so I don't forget it.
Okay.
But what are some of the key characteristics that you're looking for in individuals that you want? We so often talk about, well, what do you do as a leadership? What are the traits of a leader? What is all this? And so we talk about, okay, how do we build ourselves? But if I'm in a leadership role or I'm in a management role in an organization, what are some of the key characteristics you look for in people that you're wanting to bring on board to work for you, work with you?
Okay. That's a great question. One, I think I'm looking for, I'll call it the analytical capability, and I'm talking in terms of like finance per
Sure.
se. Analytical capability, the horsepower. Um, I'm trying to understand. Can they do the job? Do they want to do the job? Will they do the job? And and also kind of ascertain whether or not they're a cultural fit within the organization.
That's a good
Also
one.
looking for like opportunities in their, I guess, experiences in their resume where they've demonstrated leadership, and then also the potential
Hmm.
to grow within the organization. We're not necessarily hiring that person for this job. we're hiring this person to build a career within the organization. I think the other thing
Sure.
is, maybe try to understand someone's ability to, I think manage through challenges and recover from failure, and understand those dynamics. Um, the other piece of that is, are they not just about cranking out numbers, but also can they build positive business relationships with people?
Sure.
Can they do, because it's not just about finances. We're not just necessarily sitting in a cube. We're going to be partnering with different functional areas across the enterprise, and so you know we need to have somebody that can do a lot of interact in a variety of different situations, and often manage conflict, because sometimes finance is sitting there. Finance is sitting there, has oversight of the financial performance of the business, and often you may have to tell people no or have a difficult conversation. So how
Hmm.
you're assessing that person's ability to do that, and but also offer recommendations to the team on how on a different way of navigating a business challenge, where we're optimizing like the financial situation or the outcome. So
Sure.
it's not just somebody who's like driven by a calculator, but they have the interpersonal skills and the savvy to you know appropriately influence their business partners.
Sure.
Hmm.
So one thing I'm going to kind of recap on this one too, because what I'm hearing you say, the question was like, hey, what are you looking for in people to bring on board in peers or followers? And like your first thing, again, you being an analytical person in finance, you said, well, I'm looking for someone that's analytical and horsepower. So like the number one thing that I'm hearing, regardless of the role, is like they have to be a fit for the role. If it's
Hmm.
not finance, you're not looking for finance. If it's sales, you're looking for someone with that sales and charisma balance. You said
Hmm.
horsepower. Do they fit in the culture? Do they recover from failure? I think it's funny you said, do they handle conflict? And I was gonna uh, crack a joke and say there's no conflict in finance, it's just numbers, right? There's no
Yeah.
conflict in finance. Oh yeah. And you're
Hmm.
like, yeah, biting your tongue, yeah, sure, Mike, there's no conflict in finance.
Yes.
um
Yeah.
so the other question I wrote down here that I'm curious, because we talked just for a couple of minutes before going live here, and we were talking about somebody reaching out and you're spending some time mentoring somebody that you have a relationship and you're mentoring, and I'm curious, what is the difference between a mentorship role and a leadership role? Because I think sometimes those become uh, the lines become blurred, if you will. So, what would you classify? What's the difference if I'm in a leadership role here versus someone that is in a mentorship role?
Hmm. Well, and I would say in a mentorship role, it's more of the person may not necessarily is not necessarily reporting to you, or you have any like influence or you know control over their career outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like an advisory type situation where you're helping the person navigate certain situations that they may be in, or answer questions about how they manage their career. About maybe it could be like, should I take this job over that one? you
Mm-hmm.
know those types of like dynamics. How do I yeah, so how do I build relationships, those types of activities.
Okay.
um I think from a leadership standpoint, leaders also, I think they have to mentor and coach their teammates. But ultimately, you're there to like hold the yourself and the team accountable, to delivering the business results. So that's a little bit different situation. I still think you're mentoring and coaching people, but it's doing it in pursuit of like a specific objective within the organization. So you're making assessments about the performance of each of your individual team members, and that ultimately can have an impact upon their career as well as their their families as well. So um, so
Sure.
it's a little bit more, I think, solemn responsibility. Um, so
No,
yeah.
I think that's great. I mean, and one of the things that I heard you mention here is like under the leadership umbrella, you'll have mentorship. right?
Hmm.
You're going to have people that you mentor, some people that are going to fit in that, and in the separately, you won't always have leadership under the mentorship role, if that makes sense. Not in the
Hmm.
direct sort of business sense that you're replying
Hmm.
to.
Yep.
Grow Up Leadership says, "Hey, great explanation of the difference in mentorship and leadership." I think that's really good.
Yeah. There's this. You just made me think of something else from
Hmm.
my academy experience. There's a statue um, by Micah Stadium. I believe it's the Soldier statue. It's a football
Okay.
stadium at West Point. Well, anyway, it's a monument dedicated to the United States Corps of Cadets, and it reads something along the lines of the lives and destinies of valiant Americans are entrusted to your care and leadership. Well, that ideal, also translates, I think, to corporate America in that, you as a leader are impacting the lives and destinies of the people under your on your team in some way or form, shape or form. No, it may not necessarily be life or death in that regard, but in a
Sure.
sense, you have some, in my mind, you have some degree of responsibility, um, in thinking through that. So,
Yeah, I think it's really important for leaders to take like they say, "Oh, well, you can't take this, this too personal," or somebody says, "Well, this is just a job." Like, it is important to take it personal. It is personal when you're in a leadership role, when you're in a mentorship role. Like, I think that's really valuable.
hmm.
Um, Gosh, what else? There was something else I was going to ask you, and it slipped my mind. I know one of the things when you're talking about, leading people, we've talked a lot about, again, what do we do? What do you do as a leader? How can you approach this? What about team members when you have other people? And I said a little tongue in cheek earlier, like, there's no conflict in finance, right? But we're always working with other people. We're all collaborating with other people. How do you encourage team members that are not in leadership roles to bring new ideas to the team so that you can implement them as a leader?
Hmm. I think you have forums. You have forums for people to ask questions and you know, and review of business processes. I think what comes. So actually, this afternoon we're having a meeting to discuss our headcount and productivity forecast process. We've transitioned to a new application to build our monthly financial forecasts and execute the
Mhm.
close. And obviously, we're still learning the nuances and capabilities of this new tool, and what we're trying to do is drive some consistency, and make sure that people understand how to enter the data in properly, so we can properly consolidate and understand kind of where our hiring, our headcount forecast is going to be, what it is, and is it in line with our targets. So,
Mhm.
we've we built out a presentation, which, the manager on my team, she's actually, it's a leadership opportunity for her to kind of,
Mhm.
influence her peers and answer questions. But the thing is, we're framing up the meeting as kind of like a conversation. So we're not necessarily telling people what to do. It's more of, we're explaining things, how to do things and why they're important. So we're going to provide some context, how the inputs are being used and why they're important. And then I think from there
That's good.
we may get some other ideas about how to improve the process and answer. We may get some ideas, so it's not just us telling them everything and dictating my way of the highway. It's more of a collaborative approach where there's an exchange of ideas. Um, so, that's I think that's an example of like how I try to approach business problems and process changes.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think, and you hit on a couple things in there. Two things specifically that stand out to me is, leadership is not my way or the highway anymore. It was
Hmm.
for a long time. It was, when I say jump, you say how high, where, all those things. And I think especially getting into business now, it's really, really important to take in, and you commented on this specifically. You said, look, we're going to go in, we're going to have this conversation format where everybody can participate, right? Everyone's going to have that piece of the conversation. But most importantly, and for anybody that's listening to this, like, you need to hear this. Most importantly, one of the things that Alex just said, and you just said it in total passing, but it's important. I hear it and it's important to me, is like, you're telling people why. Like,
Right,
that is
right.
so valuable, man.
One thing you learn is, I think you learn, like, it's, I think maybe around the era of like World War II,
Sure.
in the 40s and 50s, people may, I guess, soldiers or may have just accepted like the, the commands of their leadership, but
Mm-hmm.
things have, times have evolved, and so people and soldiers are much more informed, and they may tend to ask questions about
Sure.
why we're doing it this way, or why we're taking up on this approach. And so you need to be willing to have that conversation, and articulate why we're going down this path. Now you have a you have an iPhone that's more powerful than a personal computer from the 1980s.
Jeez. Yeah, it's wild. Well,
So
here's
people have access to the
here's
information.
well, and here's something like, and I do think it's important to know why, but there's also timing. One of the things you said earlier on in the conversation is like gauging stuff. Is it urgent and important? Is it less urgent or not as important, and so on and so forth? I think there's times, it's okay, just my opinion. I'm curious what your opinion on this is, Alex, but like, there are times, if someone's asking the question, well, why are we doing this? Hey, ask me that later, because right now this is the most urgent thing and we have to get this done. This has to be done. We're on a deadline. Let's
Hmm.
talk about it later. Like, there is a time for that.
Yeah.
Just as there's a time for, hey, great, let's stop and talk about it and let me tell you why, and then we'll address it later. Would you agree with that?
Yes, one thing I thought of too is, if you've built a rapport with people, and you've taken the time to listen and even implement some of their feedback, when you
Hmm.
come back to ask for like those last minute requests, you already have some rapport there.
Sure.
And 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 you you know I think people are more willing to kind of help and lean in, and of course you always say
Absolutely.
thank you for their help too. You don't just say, you don't just
Absolutely.
assume that, because that's the other thing. I work in a role where we're consolidating like results, either the actual results or the forecast or maybe even the budget. And
Sure.
so, you always need, you should never assume that your ask is the only thing on that person's plate. They may have
Right.
requests from their business partner or their manager, who you're not necessarily that person, that they have to manage through too. So don't assume that their calendar is empty per se. So be
No,
respectful of other people's like commitments. Let's put
absolutely.
it that
Yeah,
way.
no one's calendar is empty this day and age, man.
Exactly.
Everybody's got something going on. Like you said, we got that iPhone, everybody's filling it up. So,
Mhm.
um here was a good one from earlier when we were talking about mentorship. Grow Up Leadership says sponsorship is a term I'm hearing being used more often, which is even different than a mentor or leader. And I think that's a valuable input. Like, if you're sponsoring somebody, and you're working with them to help them grow, I think that could lead to a whole nother hour-long
Oh,
conversation.
yes. I think that's very relevant, especially now that we have these distributed workforce models where people are not physically in the office
Hmm.
5 days a week, as has been the case historically. I was on a podcast a few months ago, and
Hmm.
there was someone who made a comment. He said, you know, the majority of the decisions made about your career are going to be made when you're not president.
Wow.
So just because you're working remotely does not um, exclude you from the need to build relationships with the people that make those decisions. And
Re-
so, you may not necessarily want to come into the office every day, and you want to stay remote, but how are you going to establish a relationship with those people who are sponsors? Because you may not know who your sponsor is. You know, the sponsor is going to be the one. Hey, that person is like, here are the two or three people you need to consider for that job. I've had interactions with them, and they have a good mind. They deliver results. They create a lot of value. You need to consider that person for this opportunity.
Absolutely.
That's a sponsor is the one who can really open the doors for you as and help you grow your career.
Man, that's so good. I saw it was a post, it was sort of a meme on social media that says, connect with those people that'll defend you in the rooms that you're not in. And that's sort of what I hear you're saying on the
Exactly, or
sponsorship front.
they'll make they're advocates for you. You know, you
Absolutely.
know, the first job. So when I was working at GE, my first role was I was a balance sheet analyst, and it was actually a role designed, I think, for somebody a couple grade levels above me that was more experienced. And I was assigned a mentor at GE, and
Hmm.
she she in a sense threw my name in the hat for that role, the commercial finance role in the used diagnostic imaging equipment business.
Wow.
And so in a sense she was sponsoring me, but that role is an inflection point in my career because I had the opportunity to work under the guidance of an experienced GE finance manager he spent 25, 30 years at GE, all in
Wow.
healthcare, and he'd had some big jobs, and I got the opportunity to kind of learn like the ins and outs of being a financial analyst. I got to do everything because it was
Wow.
actually kind of like I'll call it a financial process turnaround situation where things were kind of disorganized, and it was the first business to go on Oracle ERP. So
Wow.
you're kind of like the guinea pig for the rest of the business.
Sure.
And so, but I learned a lot in that role, got a lot of good experience and built some confidence as well. But again, it was one of those roles that no one wanted, but it was perfect for me. You know, it was perfect for me. It was
Well, and
$250 million, $300 million business. It was growing pretty quickly. Hey, it's a place you can learn a lot, and that you can scale other places.
yeah, and help propel you forward from the looks of it. So that's awesome. So as we're kind of coming to the tail end, I think we're about 45 in. So any sort of final thoughts, Alex, on just on leadership in general on the show? Anything you want to take us out with? Great conversation. I really really
Mhm.
appreciate you taking the time, taking your time out today, because that your time is valuable, and being able to pour some value into the audience here and such. It's been awesome. Been a great conversation.
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me. I would just say is, my advice to people is don't be afraid to take risks, and grow yourself over the course of your career. You build a solid set of experiences and capabilities, because those are in many ways are transferable. So if things, your opportunity for growth may not be within your existing organization, you may have to completely change organizations to grow, but hopefully you built the knowledge and the experience to be in a situation where you can be successful. And I would also say, try to become a master of your craft and be a continuous learner, and
So
ask
good.
questions and be willing to ask questions and learn from others as well.
Oh, that's
So
fantastic. No, that's fantastic. Great advice on the way out. Alex, thank you so much again for joining me today. If you do me a favor, I'll put you in the back room. I'm gonna go ahead and take us out and just hang out with me for a second here, if you would.
okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And everybody, that is going to bring us to the close of another leadership toolkit with my friend Alex Rodgers. Absolutely just great advice, down to earth, straightforward, that he had to offer. Do me a favor, throw some thumbs up on this, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you get notified, when I'm going live on these podcasts. And I offer a lot of other leadership educational videos to help you grow yourself and then ultimately grow your team. I appreciate you very much. I value your time. I hope you got a lot out of this episode, and I look forward to seeing you back here again next week. Everybody, I'll be live at 12:05 Mountain Time, and until then, be great. We'll see you soon, everybody.